It's not the money. The money is the stored trust and stored time energy that we use to exchange goods and services. I think that the money system is broken, which is why we care way more about it now than we've ever have. Because when you're stealing time by making money from nothing, then everybody focuses on generating more money because they're always getting further behind every single day. But I think the money in the business becomes this ecosystem. RevOps and everything is part of it. We're like, we need to generate more income, pay our overhead and our costs, and have more left over because we provided more value than we did yesterday. And if we have that stored money, that stream of cash flow is valuable. And if we understand how like RevOps fit into, how do the people fit into that? How do the systems fit into that? How do we thread that needle all the way through the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement? I think we can be more free to actually have more time to do the things that we want to do.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business.
How many episodes you in?
I think 41 or 42 maybe.
Nice.
Yeah, which I know pales in comparison to your 400 and whatever.
Scott, my new podcast launches on the 29th. It'll be 406.
Wow, that's awesome. So tell us about that.
So yeah, spun out on my own, just focusing on content and education and coaching. I've got an ownership framework instead of an operating framework. I think you would like it if we were to sit down and like unpack it.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Because obviously I'm not sure when you updated your LinkedIn profile, but, I just saw that this morning, independence by design framework. That sounds very intriguing.
Cliff Note version is after spinning out no services, Brendon, just focusing on the content and education. I took all the stuff that I've been working on for 10 years and said, okay, like I've had 3 different companies. They're all services tied to the big problem that I identified is the owner operator is my ideal client, not people trying to raise money, not people sitting in the boardroom. And it's the people that have a job in their asset. And the reality is that out of the owner operator conundrum, the operations, there's EOS scaling up, OKRs, there's plenty of operating systems for org charts, KPIs, all that kind of shit. There was no ownership framework, which as an ownership framework is how do we generate more sustainable cash flow and equity growth while decoupling ourselves from the day-to-day so someone else can run the company. Essentially building in that equity and cash flow growth so people can actually have the independence that they wanted when they started their company. Because I don't think anybody wants more L10s. They want more independence, but they need the company to generate more cash flow and equity growth, but they need to manage it in a way that's appropriate. So that's the Cliff Note version of it. A lot of the same content is just organized in a way that I think actually makes sense for people now.
I'm really intrigued by that. And obviously, we're only going to get through the tip of the iceberg here today, if that. So I'd love to reconnect and talk more about that. But Ryan, could you share with us like the characteristics of the businesses that you like to work with?
The business owners, Brendon, it's very similar to you and Kristen. It's the people that had an idea. And here's how I'd like to put it, Brendon, is it's the E-myth. It's the entrepreneurial seizure of the technician that said, screw this. I don't want to work for the man or the woman or the system. I want more independence. My dad barely graduated high school and started selling copiers, not because he loved copiers, just because he wanted to do whatever he wanted to do every day. Same thing with me. And same thing with, I had a group call yesterday and excavator, nurse, pool technician to, electrical technician to engineer. People don't go, yay, L10s and operations and all this stuff. It's people have this idea that it's going to create independence, and we get sucked up into the operations. So that way we can manage it. We have the entrepreneurial seizure. Then hopefully someone finds like EOS and they get some organized chaos. So they've got an org chart with KPIs and right seat, on the bus. But I don't want to do more of that. I want to wake up, Brendon, and I want to look at my calendar on a Sunday and go, I get to do whatever I want. I want to work with the people I want to work with, doing the things that I am good at, the activities that bring me joy, talking about the things I want to talk about with a purpose that's bigger than myself. It's the human part of this. And so it's the owner operator. So not the VC raising money on an idea. There's a great place in the marketplace for that, but that's raising money to specific. It's a specific problem, right? Go find a product or a solution that fits something in the marketplace, and it should have disproportionate returns for the problem you're solving. But the problem is the original thing, not the independence. And then there's people that are, capital allocators sitting on the cash flow pile. And I think that's where eventually, like a lot of the clients that I work with, like they want to get to the point where it's like, hey, I got this company that's running and I can maintain my 20 to 50 grand a month in distributions while someone else is running my company. Their CEO comp is tied to the working capital, the cash flow distributions, and the equity growth. So I can do the check-in every single month. And if you want to come in and be the salesperson, or if you want to do the podcasting or the culture officer or the designer or the marketer, it's your choice on a Sunday when you look at your calendar.
It sounds like obviously a lot of overlap with a lot of Dan Sullivan's work, right?
The strategic coach stuff is like I've never been through his material, so I can't speak to a bunch other than I'm a huge proponent of his books. I love the Ben Hardy book and Dan's book on the 10X is easier than 2X and all that stuff. I don't know how much people get into the valuations, because if you don't understand, normalized EBITDA, working capital, weighted average cost of capital, and like truly like what private equity knows, you're just guessing. And everybody's looking at top line revenue, net income, and their bank account, and they're going, yeah, I think it's working. And it's like, well, how come you don't have any time? Well, it's because like your CEO isn't managing working capital and financing the growth and looking at the financials. Like, I mean, if private equity, if you and I raised some money, went and bought some companies, we're not going to guess. You and I are going to be looking at those numbers every single day as if we're private equity, saying, okay, what's our normalized EBITDA? What's our debt? What's our working capital? And are we growing the multiple? Otherwise, we're guessing. So there's this whole layer, like you have to get into the weeds of the numbers to manage the CEO who's managing the operations. And the only reason we do that is because we want more cash flow, want more freedom. So like the thing I really like about Dan's material is like, it's the human level. So like Dan nailed, we all want freedom. How many other thought leaders have as well? And like everybody finds their own client base. But I think what I have struggled with, Brendon, is like, we have to do the hard work though. We can't just hope it works. We have to jump in and say our receivables are $3 million. Our inventory hasn't turned. Margins are eroding because of inflation. And the normalized EBITDA is going down and the multiple is going down and our debt is growing. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah, so you're still approaching it very much from the financial KPI perspective.
Well, like how else does it work, right? Like I think about this because like everybody on that call yesterday, here's what I said. I'm like, I could go find us all the money. We could go raise $50 million and someone could buy every company here. But that money is going to have three things: grow the cash flow, de-risk the cash flow, and pay down the debt. Why don't we do this? Well, because we can't just make up these loosey-goosey goals. Like it's like that's the ultimate judgment is, do you have future cash flow? Is it sustainable? And are you growing equity value? That's the nature of capitalism. So like I look at the outcome, the final judge has to be that cash flow. So like when I say is that from the financial lens, every one of these people, like we're either paying attention to reality or not. It's kind of like health. Like you're either sleeping good, you either can hit your vitals and your exercise, and it's the Peter Attia, like the ultimate judge is how well do you feel?
That is what your audience is, what it is that we're trying to do. And these are the financial KPIs or metrics that we're tracking. I guess what we talk about a lot is the how. So the thesis for our show is
RevOps, baby.
Well, but it's I mean, and a lot of people, even our clients, before we start working with them, don't really know what RevOps is. So if we simplify it, it's really the thesis is, why do some businesses scale better than others? So it's not so much about the why or the what; it's more about the how.
Yep, 100%.
Right?
Yep.
And so, and the framework that we typically use, which is essentially what RevOps is all about from our perspective, is it's about people, process, data, and technology or systems. Those four things. And every one of our guests will. Well, typically there are some that appreciate all four, but there are guests, depending on their experience and background, who will lean deeper into one or the other. We've had a lot of amazing leaders on the show who, of course, lean into people, without which, of course, you cannot do the other three. So we get that. A lot of our work is more on the process, data, and then the technology systems, because we are assuming that the people we have very little control over the people component other than training
You're
them.
you're enabling who your clients already have in place, and it's their responsibility to have the right people in the right spots. Obviously, a huge factor of that, but you're enabling what they're currently doing.
Correct. So I think but based on that, and where you've sort of started off around, again, what are those KPIs or metrics that we're working towards, I guess, as the data component, right? So
It's the ownership. It's the ownership wrapper around it. The only thing capitalism cares about is cash flow and equity growth. That's it. You could be private equity. You could be ESOP. You could be a strategic buyer. You could be the only thing anybody cares about from the financial investors, shareholders lens is cash flow and equity growth. So what all those components that you just talked about are part of future cash flow and equity growth and the ownership's goals. And so knowing the why allows the how to become way easier, in my opinion.
you're right, and I think this is where, and the example you gave earlier of the call that you were on yesterday with people in very, very different spaces and industries and careers, comes back down to what Dan Sullivan talks about, which is the four freedoms, right? The freedom of time, the freedom of money, the freedom of relationships, and the freedom of purpose.
I've thought a lot about that. You and I have talked about that. I actually have an independence of time exercise, and I extracted money from it. I actually don't think it belongs there. And if I was talking to Dan or Ben Hardy, I'd gladly have this conversation because I think it's a philosophical one that I enjoy a lot. But the only reason, money is a byproduct of our stored time. You and I both wake up and we spend time doing things, and that energy that we spent is stored in money. And that money that is stored and the value that we're providing is what allows us to do more of what we want with our time. If we need money it's money's not the goal. If you can buy the time, if you can get the independence of your time, what do you want to do with your time? And that's why I think the goal is to have wake up on a Sunday and say, I can literally do whatever I want with my time. The cash flow that I need and the equity that I need is the engine for the freedom of time.
That's kind of how I think about it now, and this is a real challenge in a capitalist society like the US or some other countries where I've lived, is that unfortunately so much of it is still measured in cash. But really, to your point, cash has no value, because ultimately, if you don't have the freedom of time and you don't have the freedom of relationship, which is hanging out with whoever you want to hang out with, whether it's family or friends or whatever, and you don't have that freedom of purpose, then the money means nothing. And we see this, and you've talked about this, I know, on your show multiple times, of people who end up with a big pot of cash, whether they're 30, 40, 50, or 85, and they go, oh, dang, that actually didn't really make me all that happy.
Well, because the time is the you can see behind here. That's the weeks in a year. You ever seen that? And that's also the red book from Carl Jung, by the way, which is fantastic. He talks a lot about this stuff, but it's the weeks in a year. I'm turning 38. I gave myself to 100, and it's 168 hours a week. That's the great equalizer. I just want to have that journey be fun with the right people. Money doesn't buy that. I mean, we're in this meat suit container for X amount of years, and it's not the money. The money is the stored trust and stored time energy that we use to exchange goods and services. I think that the money system is broken, which is why we care way more about it now than we've ever have, because when you're stealing time by making money from nothing, then everybody focuses on generating more money because they're always getting further behind every single day. But I think the money in the business becomes this ecosystem, and RevOps and everything is part of it. We're we need to generate more income, pay our overhead and our costs, and have more left over because we provided more value than we did yesterday. And if we have that stored money, that stream of cash flow is valuable. And if we understand how RevOps fit into, how do the people fit into that? How do the systems fit into that? How do we thread that needle all the way through the income statement, the balance sheet, and the cash flow statement? I think we can be more free to actually have more time to do the things that we want to do.
Absolutely. And I think a critical part of this, which again is, one of the first things that Dan Sullivan talks about, is the first thing you have to stop doing is comparing yourself to others. If you then dig deeper into that, which takes a little bit of time, how you define success, even though we have a lot of respect for each other, how you define success and how I define success for myself have to be different because we're different people, right? So everybody has to have their own definition of success, which starts with, you could have a list of 10 things. Like, when I achieve these 10 things, that is what success looks like for me. Which one of those, like when people do this exercise, it's I can wake up in the morning and I can do whatever I want to do. That's when people know that they've achieved success. But then the other 9 things are going to differ depending on the person and their unique
What do you want
ability.
to do with your time, right? Like
Exactly.
it's all the time thing. Because do you know what I'm talking about with that weeks in a year thing? It's where it's a calendar where every one of those little blocks that's drawn out as a week, and like I give myself to 100. It's like that's not your life, Brendon. That's mine. And so like when I'm spending my time doing my things, I want to do what I want. I want to think about what I want to think about. I want to work and interact with the people I want to interact with. That's not you. I'm not going to compare myself to you because that doesn't make any sense because that's my time. That's what I was given is that time. And so
Mm-hmm.
like it's ridiculous to even compare ourselves. And like honestly, like I did 48 Vistage workshops in the last 18 months. And like honestly, man, like you know how it is because you're part of Vistage and you hear all the chatter. Everybody gets in, they all get their coffee and they're all chattering around. You know what people talk about? How much shit did you buy? How many weeks are you traveling and how much time people don't have? I'm like, this is absurd. Why the hell is everybody doing this? And it's like, well, guess what? I have more freedom over time. You might have way more commas than me, but like, how's it working for you? With it, like your conglomerate tells you to go on a plane somewhere. I don't want that. Guess what? I bring my kids to school every morning. My goal is I don't want to set an alarm. And I still want to do my morning routine. I say all that because like that's a human level, and the ownership structure and the ownership framework should drive the goals to say, okay, how much cash flow and equity growth do we need given if it's an ESOP private equity firm, third party sale? And I think every agency that sells to a company should know what the ownership structure is because otherwise they're just guessing as far as how their service offering fits into that ownership structure. And then you say, okay, well, this company is providing services to these people that lands on the income statement in the revenue categories. You say, well, how are we going to provide that? At what kind of margins? What's the overhead? How does RevOps all communicate to make my customers happier? And do we have enough cash flow for this ownership structure to be sufficient or not? And everybody's cash flow goals are different.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of good stuff, which I know you and I will talk about again at another time. But a quick question. So thinking back to your career so far, and like the different roles that you had, what are the elements for you that have separated teams that have scaled more efficiently from the ones that didn't? For example, so there's in every organization that you've worked with or spoken to or interacted with, there's been not all of them are owner operators, but let's look at the ones that are owner operators. Why did some of them scale more efficiently than others?
I think it applies to every ownership structure. And I'll give some context because I've had Jack Stack, the great game of business. I've had him on my podcast a couple of times. Open Book Management, great game of business. And but like when I took over the family business, when I started in the family business, I should say, we ended up selling it, as I know, 5 years later, total turnaround. No org chart for 115 people doing 20 million in revenue, lost 940 grand in 2009. Had we sold the business in 2009, we'd owed the bank $2.5 million. So we got to say Inc. 5,000, fastest 50, best places. We got 115 employees, 20 million in revenue. We lost 940 grand. If we would have sold the business, we'd owed the bank $2.5 million. Who cares? Who cares? We were winning at the wrong ownership game. We had great. So I say all that because that's the context. I spent 5 years turning that business around, putting in all the systems, the process, all that stuff, so we could hit the $240,000 payroll every 2 weeks, then slowly growing more and more cash flow. And what I personally experienced in that part of my journey is like, I sat down and I told everybody why they're doing everything. I don't know, at a human level, it's like, do you know why where copiers came from? Why did this industry get into document management, workflow processes, and managed IT services? Well, a law firm wants to wake up and bill more clients. That's it. They don't give a shit about our servers or our server upkeep they need to wake up and, Children's Hospital needs to make sure that they're making sure that they're billing their clients and then they're fixing people. And I say all that because with the team, it was understanding the value that we provided. Back to this whole capitalism thing, we provided value to clients so that way they could do more of what they do better. Then I would say, okay, well, how do we provide that value? Selling copiers, managed IT services, software automation. We have a certain amount of revenue that we have to do of that. We have to hit these costs in these margins. So I went from sales to say 50-50 chance. We have to go month by month by month. So when are we going to sell this stuff? How much are we going to sell every single month and why? Then we have to go to cost overhead. And I went to my service director and said, we have to hit these margins. So you have to work within these constraints to hit these margins. And then I went to my CFO and said, like, what do we got to do to then hit the net income, EBITDA, normalized EBITDA, so that way we have a healthy business, can get bank financing, Corey and Ryan don't lose a bunch of money. And so like I went all the way from what are we doing to our customer, all the way through the financial statements to making sure that Corey and I had enough money at the end of the day to pay payroll and to get refinancing and to make the whole journey of being a business owner worth it. And then the high-powered teams came from, they woke up every single day and they knew why the hell they were doing what they were doing, how it fit into the bigger picture. So if someone's doing meter reads to call a client because they need to build them for meters, they knew how it fit into the client's infrastructure of technology. Maybe when they like, I don't know, like I just, maybe it's my childhood, Brendon, where it's like, I have two questions that have bothered me since the day I was born. Why are we here? What's the point? And I think everybody else, I think, asks those two questions, and we just say, you should be an accounts receivable specialist. Why? Like, and I think if people know why, people are amazing. I think people can do amazing things if they know why they're rewarded for what they're rewarded for. And if the whole pie is growing, everybody can share in the upside.
Yeah, I get that. That's really good. In again, in the businesses that you've been in and that you work with, how important have you seen the systems or the technology be in sort of to help those businesses scale?
I think it is. I mean, back to what you were saying with a lot of the guests on your show, like people is important. Like, I mean, we could go buy 15 companies tomorrow and bolt all the systems together, and I could put in a new IT infrastructure. We could build a new financials, and if the people all suck and there's no clear goal, it's going to be a disaster. So, like, back to I think what you were saying earlier, Brendon, is if we can, let's make an assumption for a second that the people are there, they're good. There's maybe a clear right goal, not just revenue, but cash flow, equity goal. The systems, like the multiple, so there's two numbers, I mean, three KPIs, three levers that equal equity value. Normalized EBITDA, which is a proxy for annual cash flow. The multiple, which is how many years of cash flow someone's willing to give based on the risk of that future cash flow. And then debt. We have to throw in the debt because we could finance our way up to an awesome company and go broke, like I said, my father and I almost did. But like the normalized cash flow, normalized EBITDA is the cash flow, like that just has to grow. Well, the second part is the multiple. Most people, like, I don't know if you have this experience where like they think it comes from an industry trade associate and thought leader. It's like, no, it's the level of risk of someone's cash flow. It's called the weighted average cost of capital. It's very similar to like a cap rate in business and real estate. Where you just take one divided by the WACC equals your multiple, and whether it's 1, 3, 5, it's how many years of cash flow based on the risk. The systems dramatically impact that multiple. So like if someone goes in and spends $50,000 with your firm to increase their efficiencies with RevOps, hopefully depending on whether it's a one-time project or if it's an ongoing expense, a lot of those times are investments or a one-time expense that then is an add back that doesn't impact it actually doesn't impact their cash flow. It's a use of cash, but their normalized EBITDA either potentially grows, and then it increases their multiple by de-risking their cash flow. Because like if all of a sudden, and how to think about this, if all of a sudden someone got twice the amount of clients, how fast can you generate cash out of that? It's a pretty straightforward answer. If you don't have any systems and processes and the people aren't working together, the answer is not very fast, then it doesn't matter. We can't turn that demand into normalized EBITDA and equity growth.
Yeah, so and I love the way because this is what we see all the time is that you cannot. So when we start working with a new client, they think they're coming to us for a CRM, right? Which ultimately is what we need. What we need to deliver, but we cannot implement and deliver a CRM without being very, very clear about what their KPIs are. In other words, what we call their data. What is their critical business data, which is then also directly related to the processes that they run in marketing, sales, customer service, and then if we're integrating with their back end systems, the processes all have to be very clear, or we have to guide them through potential
Otherwise,
changes.
you're gonna fail, right? Because they don't know what's going on. Like,
Absolutely.
and Brendon, let's play this example or play this story up for the audience. See if this helps. Because like, I find it that if we put the buyer of a business's hat on, all of this stuff comes into clear view. Because like, let's say you and I, like, just give some numbers. Let's say you and I had $5 million to go buy a company. So you can usually, like with SBA loans, you could put 10, 20% down. Let's say we go buy a garage door company because people understand like, hey, you sell garage doors and you service them, right? Pretty straightforward business model. Well, if we bought a company for $5 million because it was doing $1 million in cash flow, we would want more back, right? So we're not going to go give we would have to go either take personal guarantees out, but like you and I are taking $5 million that we could put in US treasuries or a stock market. We decide to go buy this garage door company as the asset. Every investment is a company, unless it's debt. That's a bond, right? So like, I'm gonna tie this to RevOps. So like, steer me backwards or steer me back if I don't. But like, you and I say, okay, we're gonna buy this garage door company. If they're doing $1 million in cash flow and we're gonna pay them 5 years of that cash flow, we need more back. So we're gonna go, how do they generate that money? Well, all of their income statement says revenue. It's like, okay, I don't have very much confidence in that. How do you get that revenue? Well, first of all, I want to see like what maybe commercial garage door sales, residential garage door sales, residential service, commercial service. Great. How much of each of those do you do? In what month? Over what period of time? Then you and I would probably ask more questions like, how do you generate that revenue? Because if we're buying 5 years of that cash flow, you better well damn tell me where that comes from. Well, we get referrals that just randomly come from places. Well, now your multiple's of 1. So I'm giving you $1 million because I don't have any confidence that next year that will come. But if someone looks up and says, hey, guess what? We got HubSpot, and I can show you that we do. I came from the sales, the copier. 400 phone calls, 15 appointments, 7 net news, 5 proposals, 4 closes, 40 grand in revenue, 23 salespeople every single month for 20 years. Like, and we would close 33% of that every single month. Prove it. Okay. Well, here's the CRM. Here's the database. Here are the zip codes. We got industry specialists. We've also got zip codes. And by the way, of that, then now we got managed IT service. So we go back to the garage door. If someone can prove that to you and I, maybe we pay them a 6. Right. And they say, well, okay, well, what's the customer journey all the way from the moment that someone hears us on a podcast for a garage door? They meet with our salesperson. How many meetings does that salesperson have to have? What are the touch points? Did they go to a trade show? Did they listen to content? Did they go to an event? Every part of that customer journey is called the customer acquisition cost, which I know you know. If we as investors can't see that and what the lifetime value of that customer is, we're not going to pay anybody the value that they actually might have in that company. So I think what you do and what RevOps does takes that whole thread of the customer journey and says, how much does it cost to generate that $1 million in cash flow? What's the lifetime value of those customers? And how does that generate cash flow for Brendon and Ryan as the investors of the $1 million in cash flow? And how will it be 1.2 next year? And then 1.5. And that's for owner operators, but the same goes for ESOP, same goes for private equity, same goes for every single company that's a strategic buyer. The only time that this doesn't apply is someone is burning cash on an investment of a startup that hopes they can eventually do this. But there's bigger risk profiles. But I think RevOps is like, and what you're talking about, people can't prove their cash flow, Brendon. So they're not getting paid the value that they deserve because they didn't force their people to plug in the numbers or get the systems put into place so they can prove the story that they already know is true.
Or the leaders of the company just weren't, I guess, intentional enough about.
They had the wrong goal. It was revenue.
Yeah,
and they didn't think it was worth it.
Exactly, about what the metrics are, because what we also see and hear all the time on the show, and we see this in reality with our clients, is that what you cannot measure, you cannot manage, right? So, and again, I was never a big fan of sporting analogies in business, but ultimately, for some reason, everybody likes to have a number that they can work towards to know that they're being successful.
Well, and Brendon, here's the biggest problem that I've realized over the last 5 to 10 years is like, and I say that because it's been 3 different companies I've figured this all out the hard way. It's like you and I sit in Vistage, we sit in our peer groups, we go to our conferences. What does everybody talk about? Revenue. My dad and I had a $21 million company, 115 employees, fastest 50, Inc. 500, and we lost money and we would have owed the bank money. Who gives a shit? And so I say that because like, if the goal is revenue, where does it go? It gets chunked up into 5-year, 10-year, 10-year, 5-year, 3-year, 1-year, VTO, 90-day rocks, and weekly KPIs. And it's like, no, every question, we need to flip that. And it's like seeing the zeros and ones in the matrix and say, okay, no, wrong goal. If that's the goal, how in God's name are we supposed to know? Should we launch a new product or service? Should we go into commercial? Should we lean into commercial garage doors or get into residential? Should we do more service or more sales? Should we get into HVAC? I don't know, because we could finance our way up to a $40 million company that doesn't generate any value. So like if we shift it away from it, like no one can make any decisions. Buy a company, sell a company, hire a CEO, product or service, pricing. If it's revenue, it doesn't make any sense. Shift it and say, okay, target equity valuation is the only thing that matters. Like the only reason I have an asset is because I want more equity, right? Otherwise, like go do something else with it. So how do we get equity in a business? Annual cash flow, normalized EBITDA, time the risk of that cash flow, which is the multiple, and debt. Those 3 KPIs is the 3 levers from private equity. So we say, okay, well, if that's the goal, that then needs to get layered down all the way from the top. CEO, Brendon, I'm going to hire you as the CEO of the garage door company. Guess what? I'm going to pay you 250,000 bucks. Let's say it's 250. Okay, 250 base. So you're talking about 20 grand a month. And then guess what? I'm going to give you a $100,000 annual bonus tied to normalized EBITDA and working capital and debt. And then guess what? I'm going to give you a phantom stock program for the long term to tie you into the equity growth. So I want to go from 10 million to 15 million. So then the CEO is now focused on cash flow, equity, debt. Then they layer down into all of this has to be the underpinning of the VTO. Otherwise, like literally, it goes back to the goal. People are literally waking up and guessing and hoping it all works out. It's like, well, the only reason we have a company is to grow cash flow and equity growth.
Yeah, which of course, comes back to, how the vision of the company is communicated to these amazing people that are hired. And so how do you keep those people? So you have to, ultimately there has to be a numeric measure for,
and the right one, I guess, is my point. And ESOPs instill this because of their ownership structure is a lot more clear. Private equity firms, they don't go into their annual EOS planning meeting going, what does everybody want to do this year? They're like, here's the deal. We got $500,000 to reinvest in this company. Here's when you get it. Here are the goals. And if you don't do them, you're fired. I mean, like that's kind of the over exaggerated rigidness of these of private equity. But the goal can be layered down into like, guess what? Someone needs to have those 400 phone calls a month, right? Or like the meter reads, like the person that's doing accounts payable, let's do receivables. I mean, like one of the best things people can do is look at their working capital and say, collect your receivables within 30 days. Compensate someone for that, because then you don't have to tap your line of credit. Make sure you're paying your payables within maybe the right range and turn your inventory correctly. And that those 3 people, the inventory, payables, and receivables, play an important role in the machine. Same thing with the rev ops. Like if someone's in operations and customer service and sales and marketing, they all communicate towards this big goal, but the goal isn't just revenue. And that's why I think what are your thoughts? I mean, like, do you feel like that different goal helps because of how many times people can get out of whack with where they're going?
I think the overarching 2 words that I think about as you're talking is, for every business, and for every business it's different, but every business ultimately has to understand their unit economics, and they then need to be able to explain what their unit economics are at the business level. In other words, the business goals, they need to be able to explain that to each leader of a functional area and to each employee who is hopefully being measured on a weekly basis or monthly or quarterly, whatever it is, so that they understand how their number feeds up to the unit economics of the business that drives the growth of the business, so that everybody
Right. And
has
I get so I'm so nuanced of what when you say unit economics and growth of the business, people I think have a universal confusion of what the hell does that mean. It's like it's cash flow and equity growth. That is it. And and the reason I can be so damn confident with this, Brendon, is no one can look at me and tell me it's otherwise. Like someone might say, well, I'm a B Corp and I'm a conscious capitalism company. Great. But if you don't have cash flow and equity growth, all of the purpose driven stuff you're doing goes away. Or you're a nonprofit, you go raise the money from the people that have the cash flow and equity growth. But the name of the game of our whole world is cash flow and equity growth. The intent will drive how much you extract or how much you provide value, how much margins you need. But so that's why the ownership goals of ESOP, private equity, strategic, that will drive how intense the game of cash flow and equity growth is. But the unit economics are the ownership structure's goals. And I think honestly, Brendon, people just hide it because they don't want to say that the unit economics of this are to provide a rate of return, internal rate of return for the Saudi Arabia private equity fund that we raised the money from. And there's 12 people that need all 1,400 of us to wake up and go to work so that way they get the rate of return for that pension fund. Say what it is, which is different than an ESOP where it's for the shareholders who are actually the employees, or it's for the public company who are owned by BlackRock, State Street, and Blackstone. I mean, it's just let's just call it what it is and say, but it's cash flow and equity growth. And then we drive that into then the income statement based on ownership's goals.
Bringing it back to the sort of the ownership, and therefore the leaders that essentially report to the ownership, they need to be continuously, so that the owners are continuously evaluating, to your earlier points, is this business a good investment or not?
Everyone does it.
Well,
yeah.
no, they don't. They should be.
Well, right. Well,
yeah.
They're either consciously. So it's I'm tracking you, Brendon. What I've identified is there's just a spectrum of clarity on what we're talking about. The ownership group either absolutely knows that cash flow and equity growth is the only thing that matters, or they don't. And they're like my dad, who's generate all this income and they solve for their annual K1, right? A lot of the owner operators, it's solve for annual K1, but guess what? It was a $20 million business that was a job that made a pile of annual income that wasn't sustainable long-term because every investment went against the expenses of his lifestyle. But that's the other end of the spectrum. But in between there is ESOPs, private equity firms, depending on the PE firm and their general partners or the public company. But cash flow and equity growth is it. So it's just this level of awareness. And that level of awareness will then impact the leadership team, the operations, where the investments go, and whether someone cares about RevOps or not. I mean, as a salesperson, if you said, hey, Ryan, you got to sell healthcare benefits tomorrow, or if you wanted to hire me to sell RevOps, this is how I'd sell. What's the ownership structure? What's their goals? What's their goals of cash flow and equity growth? And that's the ultimate, how you're selling is to that ownership group. And leadership, depending on how clear owners are, leaderships might be just as frustrated. Hey, you're making $250, but guess what? You have no idea why the owners are doing what they're doing. And guess what? You get a paycheck every 2 weeks either as well. It's just all the rank and file employees just don't know that. And you're just kind of pretending. It's there's just kind of this big game that took me 10 years to figure out. My dad and I were just on the other end of the spectrum, just not aware that was the game that we were playing.
Yeah. But which, you mentioned at the very beginning, the E-Myth, and it's the best-selling business book ever, I think, as far as I know, for a reason, and that is because, and you use your dad as an example, but there are literally millions, tens of millions of examples of people who started a business not because they were good at business, is because they wanted to do something and they wanted to be independent. Using your.
What do we need money for? Time. And what does private equity firms do? Well, they raise money from pension funds and endowments and insurance companies who are supposed to give their money back to the people for time.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I'm just trying to get back to the sort of the sort of entrepreneurship or business ownership. It's a very misunderstood thing because so many people, you ask 1,000 business owners why they started a business or why they're in business, and you'll get 1,000 different answers. You might be able to tie them all together and categorize them into some form of something, and ultimately, I guess the most common one will be, I just want the freedom of time.
Well, that's why Dan Sullivan hit a universal truth, Brendon, which is like anybody that spends the time thinking about this as much as Dan has, or any other thought leader, it's like it's a human thing, right? People just want freedom over their time, so they did these things, which I think is, I don't know, for everybody listening in, like hopefully, like even if you're an employee, like understanding why and how I fit into the bigger picture has been one of my most important parts. Even if it's selling copiers and making phone calls, like if I have to make 400 phone calls this month, like why? Well, it's because of this, and then if I fit into this, and like if I, and like Brendon, I've done a lot of business workshops, even though like the key executive groups. It's like when I walk, because people are like, well, this doesn't relate to me, but that's all the big feedback I get. Like I'm like, okay, well, if you're a CIO or VP of HR or CMO, you and I both know some people, one that I'm closely related to, like how much do the ownership group get it? If they don't get it, how much do you want to bang your head against the wall all day, every day, hoping that they're going to all of a sudden understand RevOps? Like, why does data management matter? Like, and I think that even the employees should be like, well, the ownership's never going to get it, or it's only for the PE fund that I don't care anything about. No one cares. Like, isn't that nice to know that then you should maybe start looking for a different job, and you don't have to be miserable every day? So I think I think it applies to everybody. Everybody.
Yeah. And I think sort of bringing it back to what you've said a couple of times now about, you sort of put your lifeline out to 100 years, right? If you live to 100, and everyone can use that same sort of long-term planning and thinking tool or mindset, which is think 25 years, right? So plan your life 25 years at a time, which is 100 quarters. And then you say, okay, well, what are my personal goals for the next 90 days? And then you just execute on those things every day. This has been proven over and over again. If you do that, you will wake up a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and then 25 years from now going, oh my gosh, all I had to do was that incremental thing every single day. And in 25 years, I'm most likely going to exceed my goal versus just, hit the goal.
I don't know if this resonates with you, Brendon, but like I think a lot of people, I naturally do what you just described. As if people are still listening and they're like, okay, I get it too. It's like, but like the people that think the opposite of me, kind of like my wife, it's like on Sunday, if you pull up your Outlook or Google Calendar and you look at all that crap on it and you can't change it, what's that say? And if you have an anxiety about that, what the hell are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're lucky enough to get fired, no one else is going to change it for you, right?
Right. Yeah, and like sometimes you have to eat glass in order to go like back. But I think that's what connects the today to tomorrow. It's like, okay, like I look at that and I go, these are my 4 independent to time categories that I'm kind of challenging Dan Sullivan's. It's the people, like who am I interacting with? So I think that's universal. I put in activities. Like I like speaking and learning and creating content. I don't want to be a sales guy. I don't want to be a spreadsheet jockey. Like, so there are certain activities, and that's kind of like the flow. Me high can checks me high. So people, activities, and topics. I think topics, talking about the things that you're passionate about, is important, because like there's no amount of money you could give me to talk about copiers again, Brendon. Like doesn't matter. And then the last one is purpose, and I think that's universal. And like if you look at your calendar on a Sunday and one of those is out of whack, it's not the money, right? When you're looking at your calendar, you're going, okay, it's one of those things that's usually out of whack that someone's like, I just really have anxiety about this. They need the money to make sure they can do that, but it's having the independence to flex into that calendar the way that people want to.
Yeah, which, and I think, Dan Sullivan's response to that would be that's why you need to, first of all, define your own unique abilities, which are different to everybody else's on the planet. And then you define your own success. So a lot of the frameworks that he's put out there in all his books they have to be universal for people to understand them, right?
So I like them. Yeah.
Yeah. But then once you start dialing it down, I think, and your response was a perfect example of that. So you said for you, it's people, he calls that freedom of relationship, right? But you have to want to make that more specific for yourself.
Which is also why you shouldn't compare yourself to other people, because like you're the one left. When we all lay in bed at night, we're by ourselves in our heads. You're either happy with the voices in your heads or you're not.
A lot of it also comes down to, and you've already said, whether you say eat glass or, I don't use that one very often. But the point is, you have to do the hard stuff, but you won't do the hard stuff until you're clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. In other words, what are your goals, and therefore, you will do the hard stuff. I mean, it's still going to be hard, but it's going to be a lot easier if
You know
you
why, right? You know why
exactly.
you're doing. You know
Yeah.
why you're doing it. And I think all the people that my podcast started because Bo Burlingham's book Finish Big: How Great Entrepreneurs Exit on Top. And it's not about exiting. More than half my clients, they want to keep their company as a cash flow machine while someone else runs it. You know what I mean? So I don't like the word exit, but I say this because 3 out of 4 people are unhappy. And what happens is, Brendon and I found out that the reason that they were unhappy, no matter how much money they made, they pulled the ripcord because that they were stuck in that situation. So they were doing hard things and they didn't know why they were doing them anymore. So they pulled the ripcord without any self-reflection. So they didn't have an ownership decision-making framework to say, what am I trying to accomplish? How does it impact my cash flow and equity goals? Maybe I take a step back, take a little bit less money, but guess what? I got way more freedom over my time now. So there's a little way to balance all that stuff, but it's that, back to your point, doing hard work for the goal makes things easier, but also if you're doing hard work and you don't see that goal, that's when people make really drastic decisions, I think.
Have you read the book Die with Zero?
I've heard that brought up a couple times in the last month. I have not, but it's on my list.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet either, but I've heard people talking about it so much, I almost feel like I have read it. And it's obviously it's a great title, but apparently the book is nothing really. The title is just a title. It's really about being very intentional about how you think about, again, why are you making money and what are you going to use it for?
You're a person, right? You got a certain amount of time. What are you going to do with it? That's just it.
So you've alluded to this a couple of times. Success and life are not a straight line. Like me, you've had challenges and struggles. I'm guessing ultimately, every time you get through one of those, you think, that it's worth it, right? Because again, you've learned something, or hopefully, that's the whole point, right? Is if you're not learning from those,
it's a me problem.
yeah. So, I mean, are there any sort of outcomes or success stories, accomplishments that you can share that came as a result of challenges that you've already mentioned a couple, but any others that you'd like to share?
There's a couple of things, and this is all about, I think, resources, because we're in the journey of life, like you talked about. Like, things for me is like, if I'm really clear on what I want, well, out of my time, my relationship, all the stuff we talked about, the kind of the four things of time, and then the cash flow and equity that I need. That's an ownership decision, human being framework. Then I can go, this situation in front of me sucks. How does it impact my situation? And if without that kind of context, I like that anxiety that I felt in my life prior, when there's no context, like when the decision's not obvious, Brendon, like I'd rather have 2 shit decisions in front of me with context than 2 decisions that are not obvious, that are okay. And so I say that because I've had a lot of hard stuff I've gone through, but it's okay. And then it kind of goes back to my daily routines of okay, it being it's the same old crap, and I'm not going to tell anybody they don't know anything they don't know, but it's the stoicism, okay, I'm going through this right now. I think Gino Wickman's got a quote, you're in the middle of something, it always sucks. We're in the middle of life. So I think that hopefully we can have the perspective. And so when I go through the hard things, it's okay, I know what I can control today, and I know the big picture, and I know where I'm at. Just instead of being lost through the woods, you're okay, constant calibration. I'm going up the cliff right now, or I'm going down, and it's perspective. And then what do I do? The one foot in front of each other. To me, it's wake up, do the meditation, do my exercise, do the journaling. Okay, eat glass, but it's going to get me one step further to where I want to be. That just helped me not lose my mind, honestly. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, I think what I'm hearing there is you're practicing what I think everybody would give everybody a lot of strength, which is gratitude. So you through your daily practices of meditation, essentially what you're doing is every day, as you whether you're halfway up the hill, the mountain, or halfway down, you're you're measuring what Dan Sullivan calls, you're measuring backwards, right? So don't measure forwards, because you have no idea. You measure backwards, and that gives you the energy to keep going. And of course, and gratitude is a huge part of that. Is focus on the things that you have, not on the things that you don't have, right?
I like the measuring backwards, but honestly, and I've read, I know what you're talking about. I like to see where I'm going though. And like, if I don't know where I'm going, and like, but it's not egotistical BS though. Like, I don't care how much stuff I have. I want it's like, so I think the stuff that I'm like striving for, of that independence over time and the relationship, is like, is worthy to look forward to. And so like, it's like, and I say that because it's looking back, but also like, where am I at in that? So like, it's as simple as like, okay, like if I know I need to hit this kind of cash flow and this kind of equity in order to have this kind of freedom, so I don't have to have an alarm clock, but tomorrow I have to tell my CMO that we're changing systems from Salesforce to HubSpot, and then their team's going to be pissed. And then it's going to cost us a bunch of money. And then our customers aren't going to have access to certain things. And I'm going to have a bunch of political fallout over the next 8 months. That doesn't sound like fun, does it? And it's like, but if I do that, then this. So it's like, it's that mental preparation to get up and do those things that otherwise aren't. I mean, like, why would you do it otherwise?
Yeah, and again, and what makes that easier is knowing why and being able to explain what the benefits are to everybody else. Like if we go through this painful change, this is what life's going to be better on the other side, and then that's what's going to motivate us all to get it done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I want to go like, I'd say that the challenge that a lot of people have these days is the ownership structure. The why is not a fun answer, because guess what? It's so that way the PE firm can make a couple more bucks, or that way the public company, like, you know what I mean? So like, I say that I think privately held businesses and ESOPs have a disproportionate amount of way to win in today's world, because they can actually be truthful to say, if we grow the equity pie for everybody, everyone can earn some value here. And there's different ways, different ownership structures can get participation, but like, there's a reason that people don't say, by the way, there's 12 people that raised money from Israel, and what it could be whatever country. I just, because there was a firm that I was working with that they raised a couple $1 billion from Israel, and they go by and did a big huge roll up, and there's 1,400 employees. Well, like, we know why that, like, and I say that because I think that allows people to say, okay, well, what journey do I want to be on? Is this the journey that makes sense for me? Is this going to a place that I want to go? And it gives you context of the whole picture.
To wrap up, I've one more question for you, which is, again, through the context of why do some companies scale better than others? From your perspective, what is one more piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with?
True ownership and leadership alignment. So the true ownership of ownership's objectives and operational alignment. That it, like, it's the thread of the threads. The needle's got to be going all the way through. The thread's got to be followed, and all the way down to the little. I mean, that the jack stack is. I mean, that's that great game of business. And if everybody's, I mean, you're in a canoe and people are rowing in their opposite direction, it's gonna suck. So the goal's got to be the right goal. And I'd say that ownership structure of what we've covered, and then tie that into operational. That alignment is, I mean, it's next level. People can outperform anybody.
Yeah. Actually, we could do a whole nother episode on operational alignment, because that's at the heart of essentially what we're doing with the teams that we're working with in businesses. So I love that advice.
Well, it makes it so much easier to understand where to invest. If we're going to make a bunch of money this year, and I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to spend $100,000 with you guys. Okay, well, what's the goal? Is it $100,000 upfront cost, and then it's going to be 50 grand a year? Well, the one-time expense is a normalization that increases. I mean, you can literally back it all. We could go all the way down to like then how you're rolling out the change management. I think but with that big ownership context, and then driving down to operational alignment, and then running like something like EOS, then drives all the way down to the KPIs, all the way down into the RevOps stuff. that thread back to what your question was. That's how you build high-powered teams. You don't just throw a bunch of players on a field and say, "Good luck guessing what sport you're playing."
Yeah, actually, I mean, I love the way this has come around, and the way you've brought us around. Which is, so for those folks listening who don't know what revenue operations or RevOps is, so revenue operations is the alignment of people, process, data, and technology. So it's all about alignment. It's operations, alignment of your operations. That's essentially what it is, that we're trying to help businesses achieve. So I love the way you brought that all the way around.
Here's why it's so cool to do this, Brendon, because it's just the truth. There's no way around this. And so the way that operations can be aligned with ownership is any CMO should be able to walk into a CEO's office. And depending on the ownership structure, it doesn't matter. If the CEO knows what they're doing and is compensated on cash flow and equity growth, normalized EBITDA and the multiple, let's assume all of that is done. And there's a very intelligent CEO that understands all these metrics and is compensated on these. There's a lot of assumptions here, given how the wide spectrum of awareness of this, but CEO knows how valuations grow and valuation growth works. They're compensated on it and really cares. The CMO should be able to walk in, and let's say you're the CEO, Brendon. I should be able to walk in and say, "Hey, Brendon, here's the deal. I know that you care about your comp plan and the ownership's plan of growing cash flow and de-risking that cash flow, the multiple and the EBITDA. Right now, Brendon, if you got a call from private equity or you had to go sit on the board meeting, Brendon, and the board or a private equity firm asked you what the lifetime value of the customer is, or what the client acquisition cost is, because they want to understand how that cash flow is getting generated and what the proof of that long-term cash flow is, and you can't prove it, Brendon, we've got a problem, and therefore you've got a problem. The way that we solve that, Brendon, for you to get your pay and your comp, so that way ownership and the board or whoever it is gets their comp, what we need is we need data, and we need a system and proof that of all the different revenue lines that we have, we can prove how we acquire that revenue, and we can prove how long that revenue stays. The only way we can do that is through tying marketing into sales, into customer service through a system. So that way, if you went out and acquired a customer, you can say, they saw this, they clicked on that, they attended that event, they did all those things. This is how much it costs. This is how much we make every single month. And they stayed with us for 18 months and it generated this much cash. And Brendon, if you as the CEO cannot prove that, you're going to be dinged along with the ownership structure. So we need RevOps so that way you can get paid what you want to get paid and we can grow the value of this company. And we might have to make a one-time investment in this project. Let's say it's $200,000 to clean up the data that we don't have, tie all the systems, get rid of sales. It could be $1 million. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's a use of cash. So we're going to have a lower net income, but we're going to normalize that because we don't have to do this every year because we're going to get this done. So we're going to use that cash once. So that's a normalizing event, which therefore normalized EBITDA is fine. Net income will be lower, but normalized EBITDA will be fine. It does not, and it actually will increase the multiple because it's going to increase the sustainability of that cash and you as a CEO to be able to prove to the board and to the investors that we have more sustainable cash flow. This is what, Brendon, we call it an investment. So we use the investment of a one-time hit of cash. We might have some ongoing costs with the agency in order to have that ongoing system. But good luck proving the lifetime value of a customer or the client acquisition cost to the board or to the investors to argue the normalized EBITDA and the multiple that you want to achieve. This is exactly how we do it. It's complete alignment between the boardroom all the way down to the people in the customer service and the marketing departments.
That is an incredible perspective, and I think in what we're seeing, in addition to the CMO, again, this is what smart CMOs should be telling smart CEOs. And what we're seeing also is that, the difference in the CFO. So because we're typically engaging with the entire C-suite in many cases in our clients, and CFOs are having so much more of a say now because I think
because cash flow and equity growth, man.
Well, but I think most businesses realize today that every functional area. So there was a time back in the days of Peter Drucker when marketing could not be measured, right? Advertising and marketing could not be measured. Today they can be, which is why the modern CMO has a number and they have to achieve that number.
Well, and like you said, it ties everything together because like, what are the roles? Well, the CEO's role is to have sales and marketing. I mean, if it's like, it's so hilarious how simple this stuff is when you actually break it down. The income statement has got 3 buckets: sales and marketing. It's a revenue. Sales and marketing, they share those, like how those GL codes, how revenue. So sales and marketing, then ops. Ops has to deliver those goods and services at that cost with those margins. And then the CFO makes sure that the overhead and everything's all tied together so they can hit their net income, EBITDA, and normalized EBITDA. So like all 3 of the figureheads of the C-suite are all tied to all 3 parts of the income statement, and they all have to be on the same page. And back to your point about data. So it's like, okay, well, what you're talking about is you're the thread of the systems between, if it flows all the way down, it's like it flows from marketing to then sales, through then ops, through then the CFO's lens, and the CFO makes sure that everything is all tied together so that way the CEO, like when the CEO sits in that boardroom, it's ultimate judgment day. How is your income statement, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement? And if they can prove what the heck they did, the board, whether it's an ESOP, private equity firm, public company, like family business, it doesn't matter. The CEO's job is to prove the ultimate judgment day of those 3 statements. CFO is helping with all the financial data. The ops is helping making sure that the cost of goods and everything's in line. And you're threading the needle with a system saying, because I think what you're doing is saying, like, we're not going to have a marketing system over here that doesn't talk to then the sales system, that doesn't talk to then the operations system. Because like I go back to my old business, Brendon, like if the Minnesota Wild call, because we were the full technology provider of them, the Minnesota Wild calls us up and they call my IT help desk. Like, I need one place where I can see what the hell did we do with them? Where did they come from? How much did it cost to acquire that client? Who are they touching in all of my company? And at the end of the day, how long did I keep that stream of cash flow? How much did it cost to acquire that? And how long did we keep it? And you're threading all that, and it's one system that has to tie all that stuff together. And if people aren't talking, they're just guessing. Because at the end of the day, and I think what any CMO can get confidence in, what I just described is literally just how normal world works. If there's any deviation away from a CEO that gets it, talking to a board or ownership that gets it, it's just a deviation of norm. Like and I think so many times, like in my old life, or over my career, I should say, Brendon, where I'm like, well, everybody else understands what's going on and I just don't. It's like, no. Actually, there might be a chance your CEO has no idea what the hell they're doing. That could be a situation, or the board doesn't care, or doesn't have management structures in place. But at the end of the day, if the CMO gets this and says what I said, they can judge against the reality of like, how clear is this entire ownership and leadership alignment? Because maybe the CMO should go get a different job somewhere else where they can get some equity and cash flow growth so they can actually have more fun doing the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, and whether it's a CMO or CRO or whatever the
whatever
title
executive is, right?
That's responsible for generating revenue. Yeah, no, this is awesome.
Hopefully, found some good gold nuggets. Yeah, there was a lot of talking.
We'll do another episode on operational alignment and dig deep into that.
I'd love to do that. I mean, with this context, honestly, Brendon, like that's one of my favorite parts to do is like we can jump in. And I mean, I was talking about like ERP implementation and change management and, like the customer acquisition journey, but like without everything we just talked about, what the hell are we talking about? So it's providing the context to like all the stuff that you do is so, so important.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it. Thanks again. And I look forward to catching up again soon.
Rock on. Thanks.